Hey everyone, we had a chance to speak with Jesse Smith today for the Saas Journey podcast. For the last 15 years, he's spent time as a sales leader and sales coach in the corporate world. He recently ran a company where he grew sales from $400,000 of revenue all the way up to $4 million of revenue in just a short amount of time. He now has his own firm that's dedicated to training and coaching sales teams at small and medium sized businesses. We thought this would be really relevant for other SaaS founders and existing sales teams to learn a thing or two about Jesse's approach to selling. Hey, Jesse. Awesome to have you on our channel. Tell me a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so thanks for having me on. A little bit of background on me. So I've been in sales pretty much my whole life. Started out with a paper route and was where I live up in Wisconsin. And so a lot of times we'd be delivering papers at 20 below, 30 below weather. And so going door to door selling newspapers. And so ever since then, just kind of stuck in the industry, was in telesales after that, right out of high school, and just kind of continued to go on that journey, and got into big box retail. Did the cell phone gig, worked for Verizon, also worked for Best Buy, and then a friend of mine who's now my business partner, he and I joined forces, and we blew up a hearing franchise. We grew it from 486,000 to over $4 million in just over 4 years.
Wow.
And just crushed it. And so we have been teaching that model that we developed, the sales process that we developed, that basically took close rates from 30% to 70%, not just for ourselves, but for the consultants that we trained, and businesses started catching wind of what we were doing. And so we decided we liked helping people do that more than we enjoyed selling hearing aids. So now that's why we're where we're at now.
Awesome. That's a great journey, starting off really young and then building through this sales journey. Something I'd love to understand is a little bit more about, what your company does. And you said you were working at selling itself, and now you are teaching, coaching
Yep.
entrepreneurs. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So what my company does, Inspired Motivated Leadership, we really help small and medium businesses that are feeling stuck and stagnant, and help them increase their profitability through building stronger sales teams and a stronger sales process. We're pretty passionate about having a good, solid process, and we really do. We kind of go against the grain a little bit. We're not your typical hard close type salespeople. We actually believe that if you do things properly, we take a very consultative approach along with coaching. And when you allow the buyer to go through the journey of making the decision where they need to go, ultimately they know that they need to do something. That's why they're there. But when they can come up with their own conclusion that that's what they need to do, why the reason they need to do it, it's a really powerful situation, because they're the ones that close themselves, and ultimately that increases everybody's engagement in the process. It increases everybody's satisfaction through the process. And so we kind of tell everybody that we teach people how to sell without having to close.
Like, what is conventionally taught when talking about selling, versus where there's also this belief, right, that you can't really force a customer to buy something. It's that they have to convince themselves and learn, and then educate themselves. And then your job is to consult and guide as a salesperson.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that? Like, how would you say that's different from a lot of this mainstream stuff we tend to see?
Yeah. So, if you take a look at it, there is an attempt right now to take out the salesperson out of the sales process. You look at a lot of these, car dealership models. They're talking about how you can buy a car successfully without having to deal with the sales guy. Right. And that's almost kind of like this, that paints sales professionals as, this scum of the earth, I remember talking to a city chamber, and we were going in there and talking about what we do, and offered them to do a training for their people. And when I said it was a sales training, he says, that's kind of like a 4-letter word here in the city. And, so sales has kind of taken on this negative approach. And the reason for that is because I want you to go back to the last time that you got sold something. When you walked out of there feeling sold, how'd you feel about it? You probably didn't feel all that great, did you?
Right.
So versus when we go in to buy something and we made the decision to buy, we're typically excited about the purchase, right? And so I think when we go shopping, if it's about something that, if it's about a product or a service that you're not that familiar with, but you have this friend that you bring with you, why? Because they're kind of like your consultant, right? They're kind of walking you through the process, and you feel more comfortable with them because you know that there's no added benefit to them for you to buy the product, unless it's your best friend and you're looking at a 70-inch TV and you know that Super Bowl is going to be held at your house. Then there might be some benefit for them, but ultimately, like, there's no benefit for them. So you ultimately feel more comfortable through the process. And if we can do that as sales professionals, instead of sitting across the table from them and sitting next to them from a consultant approach, and educate them not just on who you are and what your business does, but educate them on the industry, what they can expect, whether they come here, they go somewhere else. And you really kind of have that it's up to you mentality. It really takes the pressure off of the process and the presentation and the whole time together with the client. And ultimately, it really puts them in a position that feels a lot more comfortable to take advice from you, and ultimately makes them more comfortable to buy.
Got it. So there's this conventional idea today, right? When we're working in SaaS sales, you're looking at high growth startups. There's this nature that as a salesperson, whether you're doing outbound or inbound, I just have to hit my numbers. How many dials did I do? How many cold emails did I do? So we have this automation aspect where you're right, like where people think, salespeople are this extra thing. We can just automate it through a process. We can do drip campaigns and this sort of stuff. You're going against that and saying sales is all about personalization from day one. And you're bringing it back to those roots. So tactically, how does someone, that's dealing with 50 leads, 100 leads, what are some good practices that they tend to have, the best salespeople that you've seen, so that they can personalize it down to that level, be consultative, and be a friend to the customer that they're selling to?
I think, what you just nailed it on the head. I think too many times we put numbers ahead of purpose. And we have to go into this thing. We're big at IML. We're big on purpose. And granted, I'm all about tracking. Don't get me wrong. I'm all about making sure that we're hitting our numbers. But that is if you're looking at numbers, it's kind of a lag measure, right? What we need to be looking at is what's driving those numbers. So it's from a behavioral standpoint, and I'm a big proponent of it comes from the heart. So our purpose drives our actions. And if we really have an understanding that I'm passionate about my product or service, I'm passionate about what I do because I understand how it serves other people, and we approach it from that standpoint, you're going to be far more effective serving at a level of contacting 20 to 50 of those contacts versus going at it and saying, man, I hit all 100, but it was to get the number. And my grandpa taught me this a long time ago. I come from my grandfather's been in the ministry for like 64 years. And so he's all about, Jesse, it's all about relationship. And it's 100% true. If you go at it from the approach of what would I do if I was, helping a friend of mine with this product or service, or a relative, whatever the deal may be, I'd want to serve them at the best of my ability. At least I hope so. And so when you approach it from that standpoint, it will drive the numbers. But if you approach it from the number standpoint alone, you'll always be chasing numbers.
Got it. So when you think about the type of products and the type of founders and what products they're selling, typically, what is it? Is it software? Is it consumer goods? Like how are you guys balancing your sales approach for the different types of products that the folks that you work with through your company sell?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I don't, whether you sell on this is what we tell everybody, whether you sell a piece of software, right, or you're selling an app, or you're selling a consumable, whatever the deal is, really what we are doing is we are helping people take care of an emotional need that they really are trying to fix. They're not trying to find a new computer. They're not trying to find a new app. What are they trying to do? They're trying to find a solution to an emotional problem that they're trying to solve. And so because of that, the approach is always similar, right? It might change from one step of the process to another every once in a while, but really the approach is the same. So it really comes down to understanding that I'm not trying to sell a product or service. I'm trying to find out what emotional need are they trying to handle, and let me approach how my product or service or company can take care of that.
On the sales journey, typically from start to finish, how long is one of these salespeople interacting with the customer or potential prospect, from like first touch point to all the way to close? And is it typically through outbound or inbound? So this is really great for the viewers that are trying to understand, okay, this is great in theory, now I want to apply it. How do I make sure that, am I going out completely cold? If I'm doing cold, how should I do it? So how do you find like the best success when you approach the sales process or when you teach it?
Yeah, I mean, so if we're talking about the actual sales process in and of itself, it obviously it varies whether you're a 2 or 3 sit close type of a person, right? Maybe you have to go through and do an investigation type appointment, and then you go in with a proposal. It depends on obviously your sales model and what you're selling. But typically if you're doing a one sit, one close, and this can be somebody that's completely cold, you can go through a sales process in an hour and it can go as long as 2 to 3 hours. It really depends on the approach, how you approach it. The sales process is a process, right? But the steps in the process can vary based on the industry and everything else that you're in. So so when we approach the sales process, that's one other thing that we do is we'll literally go in and investigate your industry, investigate your business, and we'll actually help you script up what that looks like. So when you're sitting down with somebody, it's going to take an hour of your time, and then also you're letting the client know, hey, this is how much time it's going to be. Are you going to have enough time for that? So that way, at least everybody's on the same page.
Asking for the permission, absolutely.
Yep. And say, the same thing too, when it comes to setting an appointment. So everybody asks me this when they're out cold calling or they're out trying to gain new prospects to set an appointment with, they're asking me, well, do you go through the same process to set an appointment as you do to sell the product? And, you're always selling, right? So whether you're trying to sell your product or service or you're trying to sell an appointment, you need to give them a reason to make that appointment. And really, again, it just comes down to setting an appointment is just as simple as asking them, well, what would you hope to accomplish if you came in and met with me? And they're going to tell you. And then you just simply say, awesome. So how about we do that?
Got it.
Because then they're going to be motivated to set the appointment, and it's simple as that.
Right. Yeah, I really like the complete transparency in terms of how to approach it, because too much, the moment we feel like we're being sold to, whether it's over an email or whether it's to get on a call, our instinct is like to ignore, spam filter. Yep. And there's so much of it, right? Being a founder, you tend to get so many more cold emails. Some of them are truly valuable products, but the way they templatize their emails, the way they approach it, it feels transactional. And I feel like people don't buy into that experience as much anymore because our attention span is so small. So that's definitely something that's very true in terms of how you need to shape that up.
Yeah, and I would even go as far as to say, so, another thing that we teach is sales is influence, right? Mike and I, my business partner, we're certified through the John Maxwell team. So we teach a lot of John Maxwell leadership content and stuff. And John Maxwell, if you do or do not know who he is, Fortune 500 magazine and Inc. magazine have named him the top leadership authority on the globe. He's written books like 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And he defines leadership as influence, nothing more, nothing less. And so when it comes to sales or whatever the deal is, you need to make sure that you're adding value more than you're extracting value. So same thing in the sales world. They talk about that in the leadership world, that if you want people to follow you or you want people to trust you, you have to look at value as your coinage, right? As your monetary investment. And all you're doing is you're pouring into that individual. And then that way there's plenty stacked up. So if you did need to ask them for something, you're taking a withdrawal, but you're never taking a withdrawal more than you're putting in, putting in value. And so that's the same thing with sales, is that you need to add as much value during your presentation, during your interaction with that client. So that way, when it does come to the sale, you're not asking for more than you've already given them.
Got it. Something that I'd love to ask is, and this is really helpful for founders and other sales leaders that are listening to this, is, what are 2 attributes that you believe makes a successful salesperson?
Yeah, so I love that question. That's a great question. I think one for sure is you got to always be learning. If you're not learning, you're dying, right? Because learning is growing. And so there is a lifetime of knowledge that we have to acquire. If we study just the human psychology of sales in and of itself, we could study that the rest of our lives and never become a master of it, right? So I think that's, the biggest thing. And the other one is just from what, where do you approach sales? And again, it's not a me mentality. It's a I'm going to serve mentality. And so whenever I train sales consultants, whenever we go in and do trainings for sales teams, we're always telling them 2 things you need to do. Ask question, how am I learning today? And the second question is, how am I adding value today? And if you approach life and sales through that vision, success is around the corner.
Perfect. The other one I have is about, we're very much, in terms of our group and our company as a whole, are very much focused around technology. And yes, sales automation to a certain extent, but the fact that we help salespeople do the part that they do best, which is interacting and having those conversations and letting them do all these other administrative and bureaucratic work, like managing your CRMs and all that stuff and automating that, right? So that's something we believe that AI is not something that is going to replace that sales conversation, that consulting, that aspect of it, but it's that work we have to do to put those relationships together and get that meeting and build that initial conversation. So what are some types of tools, technology that you leverage on a day-to-day basis? Maybe 2-3 apps that you use almost every single day to get your work done?
Well, anybody that says that email list building is dead needs to revisit that conversation, because your email is a very valuable tool. So we use ActiveCampaign for our email automation. Been very happy with it. I've looked at a ton of them and used a ton of them. And so that's been really valuable. We also, because we do a lot of coaching, we use Schedule Once. That is fantastic for being able to just direct your coaching clients to schedule time with you, and you basically can set up all your availability and it manages it for you and sets all the reminders. They get all the reminders. I don't have to do any of that. So that really frees us up to do what we need to do.
Got it. Awesome. And the last question I have is, what's one book you would suggest to founders, sales folks that you personally like?
Yeah, so this is a real easy question for me around sales. There's an author by the name of Patrick Lencioni who wrote a book called Getting Naked. And it's not what you think. It's a book that's around this, consultative approach that we take. And it's a fable, so it's actually written in a story format. It's not like a personal development type format. It keeps you engaged, but it really shows you the contrasting difference between your atypical salespeople and then somebody that comes in that just wants to add value and see somebody succeed, and you see what the difference in the results are. And it really is a great perspective around this topic that we've been talking about today.
Fantastic. That's Jesse from Inspired Motivated Leadership, everyone. Thank you so much. Jesse, really appreciate you being on the show. We're just getting this rolling, so this will be really exciting and valuable